Sister Romina and Roxana asked me to give 2 talks about leadership. So in the first one today, I want to talk about the Christian spirituality of leadership. What does it mean for us as Christians to exercise leadership? And then tomorrow in the second one, I want to talk more about Dominican government. And I want to be much more practical tomorrow. I want to look at how we govern in our tradition practically. So we all know that Christian leadership is about service. Jesus said that the greatest of us must be the servants of all. But what does this mean? Servants can be very bossy. Think of those French waiters. See? C'è un problema? No. Servants can be very bossy. Think of those French waiters who look with infinite contempt at people who order the wrong wine. Daniel Cadrin, who is one of my assistants, visiting Paris, he loved a pudding so much he ordered another. And the waiter simply said no. So servant, yes, but what sort of servant? The Pope's title is the servant of the servants of God. But some popes have been pretty bossy too. So I think that Pope Francis's biggest challenge to us today is to think again about the meaning of servant leadership. From the moment he knelt on the balcony of St. Peter's and asked for the blessing of God, it was clear that he was going to embody a new form of servant leadership. And this goes back to a crisis he endured at the end of his time as a Jesuit provincial. He was aware it had not gone well. He was quite authoritarian, and his Jesuit confrères, his brothers, didn't like it. He understood that he had to transform his understanding of leadership, which he began to do when he was a bishop in Argentina, and now he does for the whole church as Pope. You see, the idea of leadership, which has dominated modernity since the 16th century, is control. The leader controls. The Canadian historian of idea, Charles Taylor, has said that modernity went with centralized control of the modern state. We saw the explosion of administration, endless rules and regulations, and in our time, an obsession with health and safety, which is quite useful when you have COVID. And this has affected the church. The church became, in recent centuries, more and more centralized, with Rome keeping its hands on the steering wheel. So increasingly, church leadership was seen as control, administration, management. I had dinner with a former Vice Chancellor of the University of Cambridge, and he asked me what I did as Master of the Dominican Order. And I explained, and he said, "Oh, I see. You were the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer of a multinational corporation. How did you compete with the Franciscans in the vocation market? How did you market your brand?" So you see, he saw us as a business. That is a great temptation today to see all organizations as businesses. Now, I think that during his little crisis, it dawned on Francis that this is not how Christian leadership should work. It's not about control. In fact, it's about a sort of letting go of control, letting the Holy Spirit take over. In Evangelii Gaudium, he said, there is no greater freedom than that of allowing yourself to be guided by the Holy Spirit, renouncing every attempt to plan and control everything to the last detail, and letting the Spirit enlighten, guide us, direct us, leading us to wherever he wills. In a sense, the strong leader is the person who does not try to control everything. And I think that a lot of what Pope Francis has been trying to do is about letting go of control of the central government. With his appointment of the Committee of Seven Cardinals, with how he organizes the synods, with his emphasis on local episcopal conferences, he wants power to move downwards. And the second reason why Francis has this new idea of leadership is because he deeply believes that every baptized person has been anointed as priest, prophet, and king, or in your case, queen. Every single one of us is called to leadership. That's why Francis almost never talks about priests. He always talks about faithful disciples. That's all of us. So Francis is challenging us to think differently. First of all, because we're all called to leadership because of baptism. And secondly, because leadership is not about bossing people around. It's letting the Holy Spirit surprise us, disconcert us, and lead us to unexpected places. What does this mean? I think we're just at the beginning of understanding. So how do you balance, particularly if you're elected to a leadership position, how do you balance taking strong decisions and letting unexpected things happen? When should you take decisions that yourself, and when must you empower other people to do so? It's not clear. We're finding out. So today I want to look at it on the level of Christian leadership, and then tomorrow, if you still want me to carry on, I will talk about it in the Dominican tradition, how we practically do this. This morning, I'm going to talk about the parable of the prodigal son. Now, the parable isn't obviously about leadership, but it does show the extraordinary things that happen if you let the Holy Spirit take over. Don't get me wrong, administration is vital, and I admire all the brothers and sisters who are good administrators, but that is not the same as leadership. So let's go through the parable bit by bit and see what it says. There was a man who had two sons. That all sounds rather male, doesn't it? What about the mother? What about the daughters? Probably the only women in the parable are some of the servants, and who knows, maybe the lamb. But I don't think this matters very much, because the prodigal son is every child trying to grow up. And the father is every Christian leader trying to help the young become adult. The father is not patriarchal. He refuses to play the role of the macho male. And in Rembrandt's famous painting in the Hermitage in Russia, you will remember that he has a masculine hand and a feminine hand. So it's not a story about men. It's a story about growing up. A lot of leadership is helping each other to grow up. I continue with the parable. The younger son said to his father, "Father, give me the share of property that falls to me." And he divided his living between them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took his journey into a far country. And there he squandered his property in loose living. The parable is about the loss and the restoration of the unity of the family. The prodigal son breaks up the family, and the father brings everybody back into unity. So the very last thing we're left with is the eldest son. Will he come back? And the first fruit of all grace is unity. Paul writes to the Ephesians, "There is one body and one spirit, just as you were all called to the one hope that belongs to your call. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of us all, who is through all and in all." Christian leadership means that every one of us is charged with caring for unity of the community. The congregation cannot have leaders of parties creating division. The church is deeply polarized, especially, I think, in the West. Conservatives and progressives, traditionalists, liberals, they read separate periodicals, they look at different blogs, they have different heroes and different villains, they love different popes. Some love Francis, some love Benedict, and regard each other with suspicion and even detestation. You can see this in the United States at the moment. So the first task of every leader, and that's every one of us as baptized, is to refuse to belong to a party. Christian leadership, from the Pope to the latest convert, summons us to transcend party politics. It is not Catholic to claim to be a progressive or a conservative. Christianity summons us beyond such narrowness. Now, this is in part a challenge of the imagination. In this parable, the father has to reach out imaginatively to his errant child, and then he will reach out to his elder son and invite him to imagine being with his brother. Imagination is key. If you want to be a good leader, you must be able to imagine. And if I may interject, my latest book in English is called Alive in God, a Christian Imagination. It's translated into French, Choisis la vie, and it will soon be appearing in Italian. It's already translated, but because of COVID, it's not been published. You have to imagine what it's like to have views with which you disagree. If you're a 60s liberal, rather like me, you have to imagine why some young people want to bring back the Latin Tridentine Mass. If you're a so-called conservative, you have to imagine why some people are very relaxed with the rubrics and want to play the guitar. Can you imagine why some people are passionately in favor of ordination of women? Can you imagine why some are passionately against? Can you imagine why some people love Pope Francis and some people are frightened by him? Imagine. Let's continue with the parable. And when he had spent everything, a great famine arose in the country, and he began to be in want. So he went and joined himself to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed swine. And he would gladly have fed on the pods that the swine ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have bread enough to spare, but I perish here with hunger. I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants." And so he arose and went to his father. And while he was still at a distance, his father saw him and had compassion and ran and embraced him and kissed him. There you have the secret of leadership. Notice his father saw him from afar. He kept an eye open for him. He didn't treat his son's departure as a dramatic event because he knew he would come back. So he's patient and he's calm. When the young man grabs the money, the father doesn't make a scene. He doesn't threaten him or offer to double his pocket money. Life goes on. When a young friar was recently elected prior, he asked me, "What's the secret of being a good prior?" And I said, "Love your brothers and keep calm." Religious people are extraordinarily inclined to drama. I lived in Italy for 9 years, and you know, sometimes it was like being in an opera by Puccini. But if we are the servants of Christ, the great drama has already happened. Christ has died, Christ is risen, Christ will come again. Leadership means de-dramatizing things when everybody else is getting excited. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the great Lutheran theologian, wrote to Bishop Bell just before he was murdered by the Germans, "The victory is certain. Keep calm." Let me tell you about a dramatic event when I was a young friar. The prior was a Scottish Dominican called Fergus Carr, a great theologian, and the priory was attacked by a right-wing group who resented our cause in anti-racial legislation. We campaigned against nuclear weapons. Every good demonstration had a Dominican. So they set off a small bomb, which made a lot of noise and blew in the windows of the priory. And it woke up the whole priory, the whole community, except the prior. The police and the fire brigade came around. We all gathered in the front. Everybody was there except the prior. Finally, the youngest friar was sent to wake the prior up. "Fergus, Fergus," he said, "the prior has been attacked." Fergus lay in bed and he said, "Is anybody dead?" "No." "Is anybody wounded?" "No." "Well, go away. let me go to sleep and we can think about it in the morning. That's when I learned my first great lesson about leadership. Love has won the victory on Easter Day, so we don't need to worry. Okay, the church is burnt down. The treasurer has run off with the money. And maybe one of the priests has had a sex change. But no worries. Christ has risen from the dead. This father has confidence in his young son's ultimate return. Confidence in the young is an essential part of Christian leadership. When St. Dominic sent out his youngest friars to preach, barely after they joined the order, the Cistercian monks warned him he would lose them. They would probably run away with wild women or something. St. Dominic replied, I know for certain my young men will go out and will come back. They will be sent and they will return. Your young men will be locked up and they will still escape. St. Augustine said, our God is always younger than we are. And so confidence in the young is an intrinsic part of Christian leadership. Let them make mistakes. Let them go astray a bit. Don't try to control them. The prodigal son is anticipating the future. According to one scholar, he says to the father, I cannot wait for you to die. I want the future now. Give me my share. This is not a good way to do it, but it belongs to leadership to let the future happen, even if this means stepping into the unknown. God's grace is the future breaking in now, the unknown future. Now, for this to happen, sometimes we have to let the present go. Often communities are burdened by the past and we want to hang on. We don't want to let anything go because we don't want to be known as the person who closed this school, this hospital, this priory, or changed this tradition. When I was elected provincial, I had to visit a monastery of Dominican nuns nearing the end of its life on the Isle of Wight, Carisbrooke, it was called. I took Peter, who was the marvelous previous provincial, with me. There were just 4 ancient nuns left. And one of them said to me, but Timothy, our dear Lord would not let Carisbrooke die, would he? And Peter said, he let his own son die. Death is part of our existence. If you cannot face death, you will never have the resurrection. We don't need the young to take our place, but we want them to do and be what we cannot imagine or anticipate. So in the world of administration, leadership is not about taking control. It's not about keeping your hands on power. It's about letting God's unpredictable grace rule. It's making sure that the bullies, the cautioned, the cautious, the frightened, the writers of blogs, make sure that none of them rule, not even the bishops and the priests. It's giving the young the freedom to make mistakes and start again, as the naughty son did. But while he was yet at a distance, his father saw him and had compassion and ran and embraced and kissed him. Here we see fundamental leadership. Christ is our leader because he goes before us into the presence of God. He takes the first step. He leads the way. Christian leadership is about stepping out in front, going ahead. The prodigal son takes the first step to go and see his father. He doesn't wait to receive reassurance. The father steps out to go and greet his son. He doesn't wait until he has received an apology. So both take the first step to each other. That's leadership. If you say to one of the sisters, it's her fault, she should take the first step towards me, that is a failure of leadership. Pope Francis wrote in his first encyclical, the church which goes forth is a community of missionary disciples who take the first step, who are involved and supportive, who bear fruit and rejoice. An evangelizing community knows that the Lord has taken the initiative. He loved us first. And so we can move forward boldly, taking the initiative, go out to others, seek those who've fallen, stand at the crossroads and welcome the outcast. And for this, both the father and the son must cast off their dignity. The son comes to the father not claiming to have the dignity of a son, happy to be one of the hired servants. And the father casts off all his patriarchal dignity. He runs across the field as if he were a child, making a fool of himself. And we exercise leadership by not caring about our dignity. Nobody looks so stupid as somebody who cares for their dignity. The former head of the Redemptorists, now Cardinal Tobin, was staying at Blackfriars, and he went into the back kitchen. It was my turn to do the washing up. And as you can probably know, for 25 people, washing up is a big challenge. And he said, never remember the motto of the USG, the Association of Heads of Religious Orders. One day a peacock, the next day a feather duster. The moment that you care for your leadership, your dignity, it's lost. Pope Francis showed us the way right from the beginning, refusing the papal car, getting into the bus with the ordinary common or garden cardinals. This means that we must make ourselves vulnerable. We must be the first to take off the armor, to offer apologies, knowing that we may be rebuffed, the first to say sorry. So that leaves an interesting question. How far do you feel that you have to care for your dignity? So a bit more. But the father said to his servants, bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and a ring on his big hand, and shoes on his feet, and bring the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and make merry. For this my son was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found. And they began to make merry. He gives them shoes, the sign of a free person. He cares for his son's dignity. When I was master of the order, nothing was more likely to keep me awake at night than the fear that I might have said a word that humiliated a brother. It's easy to do a witty joke, an off-the-cuff remark, and that brother would remember always that he met the master once and was made to feel small. My brother Herbert McCabe once went to confession in Dublin. I've no idea what he confessed, but he received a terrible ticking off from the priest. So he went out, said his penance, and waited. And when the priest came out of the confessional box, he grabbed him and he said, "Never, ever speak to a penitent like that again." I left the confessional feeling crushed rather than lifted up. And they began to make merry. And this is the fundamental point of the parable. Jesus had been provoked into telling the parable by the Pharisees and the scribes, who murmured, "This man receives sinners and he eats with them." The climax of the story is the invitation to celebrate. It's fitting you were married to be made merry and glad, for this your son was dead and is alive. He was lost and found. So Christian leaders should lead the way to the party. The beginning of the preaching of the gospel is Jesus' festivity at Cana, turning water into wine. So we rejoice in human beings, whatever mess they may be in. We've nothing to say to anybody unless people know that we enjoy them. I'll just skip a couple of paragraphs now because it's going over time. Jesus tells this parable in part because he has been misunderstood. If you party with prostitutes, this is inevitable. I bet you if your bishop were to hold a party for the local sex workers, he will be misunderstood. If you hang out with the tax collectors, people will think you want to squeeze the poor. But you cannot say anything worthwhile if you don't take the risk of being misunderstood. If you abide with the poor, like Archbishop Helder Camera, people will accuse you of being a communist. If you open your home to gay people, people will accuse you of rejecting the church's teaching, I can assure you. But if you do nothing, then you will certainly be misunderstood, and you will never preach the gospel. Jesus died on the cross because he took the risk of being misunderstood. So we've just a very short moment for the eldest son. Then I'll stop. "Listen," he says. "For all these years I've been working like a slave for you, and I've never disobeyed your command. Yet you've never given me even a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted goat for him." This son of yours, not my brother. This is the language of contempt. And he accuses him of having spent his money on prostitutes. There's absolutely nothing in the text to confirm this. He probably wanted to spend his money on prostitutes, but he never dared. Maybe the younger son had spent it on whiskey or gambling. Leadership is speaking words that heal rather than hurt. We choose the words we speak, words that lift people up, give them confidence, put spring in their steps. Or we can speak words that cast them down and make them feel despised. When I visited Rwanda during the genocide, you could see the graffiti saying, "Kill the cockroaches." We can kill our brothers and sisters with harsh words that undermine them and destroy their confidence. When I was a child, we had a saying we used to repeat, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never kill me. It's not true. We can kill people with words. When we look at candidates for the order, the first thing is, how do they speak of others? So yes, to conclude, leadership is indeed service, but beware, servants can be very bossy. Pope Francis has taught us a way of leadership that is not about control. It's about empowering other people. It's about holding people in unity. It's about remaining calm, whatever happens. It dares to take the first step. We dare to be vulnerable. We celebrate, even with lovely curries, I hope, sometimes. And we have the courage to do things which may be misunderstood. And we lead each other and our sisters beyond fear. So tomorrow, I'll turn to Dominican tradition of leadership and look at much more practical things about how we take decisions together. Thank you very much.